They called her broken, worthless, a defect in a world obsessed with bloodlines. Tonight, Eliza Thornfield would be sold like livestock to a man who collected fear the way others collected jewels. Her father's pen scratched her name from the family ledger as rain hammered the windows, erasure made official. But in the ruins of her shattered life, she would discover something her father never understood. The truly dangerous aren't those born with power. They're the ones with nothing left to lose. Stay until the end to see how she burns it all down. Like this video and comment which city you're watching from. The rain came like judgment. It hammered against the leaded windows of Belhaven Manor's study with the kind of violence that made the glass shudder in its frames. Each droplet struck with the fury of 1,000 tiny fists, as if the sky itself was trying to break through and drown everyone inside. The fire in the massive stone hearth did nothing to warm the room. It crackled and hissed, casting shadows that danced like demons across the wood-paneled walls. Eliza Thornfield stood perfectly still before her father's desk, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She wore a dress of gray wool, practical, modest, forgettable. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple knot at the nape of her neck. No jewels adorned her throat or fingers. No rouge brightened her pale cheeks. At 23, she had learned that invisibility was sometimes the only armor available to women. Her father didn't look at her. Lord Edmund Thornfield sat behind his mahogany desk like a king passing sentence, his face carved from granite and winter wind. His hair, once dark like hers, had gone silver at the temples. Deep lines bracketed his mouth, not from laughter, but from years of barely restrained contempt. He dipped his pen in the inkwell with deliberate slowness, the nib scratching across the page with a sound that made Eliza's teeth ache. "There," he said finally, his voice flat and final as a coffin lid closing. "It's done." He turned the ledger toward her. The family record. Generations of Thornfield names inscribed in careful script, each one a link in the chain of bloodline and legacy. Marriages, births, deaths, the official history of a minor noble house clinging to relevance in a world that had largely forgotten them. And there, next to her name, Eliza Catherine Thornfield, was a single word in fresh black ink, sold. Not married, not betrothed, sold. "You will leave at dawn," her father continued, already turning back to other papers on his desk as if she had ceased to exist the moment the ink dried. "The Duke's carriage will arrive at first light. You will take nothing but the clothes you're wearing. He has made it clear he wants no dowry, no trousseau, no—" He paused, his lip curling with distaste. "No reminders of this house." Eliza's throat had gone tight. "Father, don't." The word cracked across the study like a whip. Lord Thornfield's hand slammed down on the desk, rattling the inkwell. When he finally looked at her, his eyes held nothing but cold arithmetic. "You have already cost this family enough. 4 years of marriage negotiations, 4 years, and every single prospect withdrew the moment they learned the truth about you. The truth about her, barren, infertile, defective. The physician's words had been gentler, wrapped in medical terminology and sympathetic glances, but the meaning was clear enough. An injury in childhood, a fall from a horse, a fever, something the doctors couldn't quite agree on, had left her unable to bear children. In a world where a woman's primary value was measured in her ability to produce heirs, she might as well have been dead. "You are a liability," her father said coldly, "a burden this house cannot afford to carry. The debts alone—" He cut himself off, jaw working. "Duke Ashford offered to settle everything, every penny, in exchange for your hand in marriage." "Why?" The question escaped before Eliza could stop it. "Why would he want me if I can't?" "I don't know, and I don't care." Lord Thornfield's voice had gone sharp with irritation. "Perhaps he's as desperate as we are. Perhaps he has some twisted reason of his own. It doesn't matter. He has money, we have debts, and you—" His gaze raked over her with brutal assessment. "You're the only currency I have left to trade." Outside, thunder rolled across the moors like the sound of distant artillery. The windows rattled harder. Eliza felt something crack inside her chest. Not her heart. That had been breaking in small increments for years. This was something deeper. The final tether connecting her to the desperate hope that her father might, even now, show her some small measure of care. "I see," she said quietly. Lord Thornfield's expression flickered, surprise, perhaps, that she hadn't wept or begged. You will conduct yourself with dignity. You will not shame this house further. And you will remember. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to something almost venomous. Whatever happens in the north is no longer my concern. You are his problem now. Of course. Eliza's voice came out steady, calm, a small victory. May I be excused? Her father waved a dismissive hand, already returning to his papers. Go! She turned toward the door, her movements measured and deliberate. Each step across the study felt like walking through deep water. She could feel his eyes on her back, checking to make sure she was really leaving, that the transaction was complete. Her hand was on the door handle when his voice stopped her. Eliza. She paused but didn't turn around. The Duke is a dangerous man, her father said, and for a moment, just a moment, something almost like regret colored his tone. They call him the Iron Duke in the capital. His family, there are rumors, dark ones. Then we should get along well, Eliza replied softly. After all, I'm the daughter you were willing to sell to settle your gambling debts. She didn't wait for his response. She pulled open the door and stepped into the corridor beyond, closing it behind her with a quiet click that somehow felt louder than a slam would have been. The hallway was dark, lit only by a few guttering candles and wall sconces. Shadows pooled in the corners like spilled ink. Eliza walked slowly, her footsteps silent on the worn carpet runner. The manor groaned around her, old timbers settling, wind pressing against stone, the whole structure creaking under the weight of centuries. She had grown up in this house, learned to walk in its corridors, played in its gardens before they grew wild and overgrown. Once, long ago, she had been happy here. Now it felt like a tomb. She climbed the narrow servant's stair to the third floor, where her small bedroom waited. No one saw her. The few servants who remained avoided her these days, whether out of pity or superstition, she couldn't say. The broken daughter. The shame of the Thornfield name. Her room was sparse, a narrow bed, a washstand with a cracked basin, a single window that looked out over the moors. She had sold or pawned most of her belongings over the past 2 years to help with the household expenses, though her father had never acknowledged it. Eliza sat on the edge of the bed and stared at her hands. They were shaking. All the composure she'd maintained in her father's study was crumbling now, here in the privacy of her own room. Her breath came faster, her vision blurred. Sold. Not to a kind merchant looking for a companion, not to some minor lord who might value intelligence or conversation, but to the Iron Duke of the North, a man whose very name made servants cross themselves and whisper prayers. Duke Rowan Ashford. Even in the isolated reaches of Belhaven, she'd heard the stories. The Ashford family was old power, ancient bloodline stretching back to the kingdom's founding. But it was cursed power. For generations, the Ashfords had torn themselves apart from within, brother murdering brother for inheritance rights, wives dead under mysterious circumstances, heirs who never lived to see adulthood. They said Duke Rowan had survived 3 assassination attempts before his 18th birthday, that he'd executed his own uncle for treason, that his castle in the northern mountains was more fortress than home, all iron gates and guards with loaded crossbows. And he wanted to marry her, a woman who couldn't give him children, who brought no dowry, no alliance, no strategic advantage. Why? The question circled in her mind like a vulture over carrion. A knock at the door made her jump. Miss Eliza? The voice was soft, tentative. Margaret, the aging lady's maid who had served Eliza's mother before her death. May I come in? Yes. The door creaked open. Margaret entered carrying a small tray with tea and bread, probably smuggled from the kitchen. The old woman's face was lined with worry, her gray hair escaping from beneath her cap. I heard, Margaret said simply, setting the tray on the washstand. The whole house knows by now. Of course they did. Servants always knew everything first. He's sending me away at dawn, Eliza said, her voice hollow. To the north. To Duke Ashford. Margaret's hands twisted in her apron. I know the Duke's reputation, miss. I know what they say about his family, but... She hesitated, then sat carefully on the bed beside Eliza. Perhaps it won't be as terrible as you fear. Perhaps he's not the monster people whisper about. And perhaps he's worse. Eliza looked at the older woman. You don't have to comfort me, Margaret. We both know what this is. I'm being sold to clear debts, nothing more. Your mother would never have allowed this. My mother is 10 years dead. The words came out harsher than Eliza intended, but she couldn't seem to soften them. And even if she were alive, what could she do? Women don't get to refuse in situations like this. We just endure. Margaret reached out and took Eliza's hand, squeezing gently. The gesture was so simple, so kind, that it threatened to undo all of Eliza's carefully maintained composure. You're stronger than you know, child, the old maid said quietly. Your mother saw it in you. Even as a girl, you had steel in your spine. Don't let them break you. I'm already broken, Eliza whispered. The physicians made that clear. Broken and beaten are different things. Margaret's grip tightened. Remember that. Sleep didn't come. Eliza lay in the narrow bed, listening to the storm rage outside and the house settle into its nighttime creaks and groans. Somewhere below, a door slammed. Footsteps echoed in the hall, probably her father, heading to bed after finishing whatever paperwork had occupied him. She wondered if he'd sleep well tonight, knowing he'd bartered away his daughter to save himself. Probably. The ledger entry burned in her mind. Sold, as if she were livestock. Property to be traded when convenient and discarded when not. She thought about running. The idea flickered bright and desperate in her mind. She could slip out before dawn, take one of the horses, disappear into the countryside and reinvent herself somewhere far from noble houses and marriage contracts. But where would she go? She had no money, no connections, no skills that would let her earn a living. A noblewoman alone on the roads would be prey for bandits or worse. And even if she escaped, her father's debts would remain. The creditors would take everything, the house, the land, what little remained of the Thornfield legacy. Not that she cared about the legacy, but the servants who depended on the estate for their livelihoods, they would suffer. Margaret, old Thomas who kept the stables, the kitchen staff who had slipped her extra food when she was a hungry child. If she ran, they would pay the price. So she stayed. She lay in the dark and watched the hours crawl by, counting each minute until dawn came to claim her. The carriage arrived exactly at first light. Eliza heard it before she saw it. The rattle of wheels on gravel, the snort of horses, the jingle of harness. She stood at her window and watched it emerge from the mist like something out of a nightmare. It was black, entirely black. Black lacquered wood with iron reinforcements. Black horses with black plumes. Even the driver wore black, his face hidden beneath a hood. No family crest adorned the doors. No bright paint or gilding marked it as belonging to nobility. It was designed for one purpose only, to be intimidating. It worked. Eliza dressed carefully in her gray wool dress, the only decent one she still owned. She pinned her hair back, splashed cold water on her face, and stared at her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. A pale ghost stared back, dark-circled eyes, bloodless lips. The face of someone already halfway to disappearing. No, she whispered to her reflection. You don't get to vanish, not yet. She lifted her chin, straightened her shoulders. If she was going to her doom, she would at least meet it standing upright. The walk downstairs felt eternal. Her footsteps echoed in the empty halls. No one had come to see her off, not that she'd expected them to. Her father wouldn't waste the effort, and the servants had already said their quiet goodbyes the night before. The front door stood open. Rain still fell in sheets, turning the gravel drive into a river of mud and stone. The black carriage waited, its door hanging open like a mouth. A man stood beside it. Not the Duke, Eliza knew that instinctively. This was a servant, though not like any servant she'd seen before. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in black with a short sword at his hip. His face was weathered and scarred, the face of someone who'd seen combat. He looked her up and down with cold assessment, then gave a short nod. Miss Thornfield, I am Marcus, head of Duke Ashford's personal guard. Are you ready? Ready? What a strange question, as if she had a choice. Yes, she said simply. Marcus gestured to the carriage. The journey will take 3 days. We'll stop at coaching inns along the way. The Duke has arranged private rooms and meals. You will be safe. Safe. Another strange word coming from a man who looked like he'd killed people for breakfast. Eliza approached the carriage, rain immediately soaking through her dress. She paused at the door, looking back one last time at Belhaven Manor. Her father stood in the study window, a dark silhouette against the lamplight. He didn't wave, didn't acknowledge her at all. He just stood there, watching to make sure she actually left. Something cold and hard crystallized in Eliza's chest. Fine. She climbed into the carriage without another glance back. The interior was surprisingly comfortable. Plush velvet seats, thick curtains, even a small brazier for warmth. Marcus closed the door behind her, sealing her in darkness except for the gray light filtering through the rain-streaked windows. The carriage lurched into motion. Eliza pressed her hand against the cold glass and watched Belhaven Manor disappear into the mist and rain. The house she'd grown up in, the only home she'd ever known. Gone. She was alone now. Truly alone. Heading north to marry a stranger who had purchased her like one might purchase a horse, with cold calculation and specific requirements. The rain drummed on the carriage roof. The wheels churned through mud. Hours passed in gray monotony. Eliza didn't cry. She sat very still, hands folded in her lap, and let the numbness spread through her like frost. Crying would change nothing. Grief would solve nothing. Fear would only make her weak when she needed to be strong. So she buried it all. The anger, the hurt, the crushing sense of betrayal, and locked it away somewhere deep inside where it couldn't touch her. If she was going to survive what came next, she would need to be ice, stone, iron, the kind of woman who could be sold and not break, the kind of woman who could walk into a nightmare and find a way to make it hers. 3 days later, the carriage crossed into Ashford territory. The landscape had changed. Gone were the gentle rolling hills and farmland of the south. Here, everything was harder, sharper. Mountains rose like broken teeth against the sky. Pine forests grew thick and dark, pressing close to the narrow road. Even the air felt different, colder, thinner, carrying the scent of snow and stone. They passed through a small village clustered around a crossroads. The people stopped their work to stare as the black carriage rolled past. An old woman made a warning gesture. Children scattered. "They fear him," Eliza said quietly. Marcus, riding alongside the carriage, glanced at her through the window. "They respect him. There's a difference." "Is there?" "In the north, yes." Marcus's expression was unreadable. "The Duke is hard, but he's fair. He protects his people. They know that." "Protects them from what?" Eliza wanted to ask. But she wasn't sure she wanted the answer. The road climbed higher into the mountains. The trees grew thicker, blocking out the weak sunlight. And then, as they rounded a sharp curve, Eliza saw it. Iron Crest Abbey. It wasn't a castle in the southern style, all soaring towers and bright pennants. It was a fortress, a massive structure of dark gray stone that seemed to grow directly out of the mountainside. High walls bristled with iron spikes. Guard towers loomed at each corner. The only entrance was a heavy iron gate reinforced with thick beams. It looked like a place built to withstand sieges, to repel armies, to keep the world out and its secrets in. This was where she would live now. This was home. The carriage rolled through the gate, which closed behind them with a clang that sounded like a cell door slamming shut. The courtyard was large and bare, no gardens, no decorations, just gray stone and mud. Soldiers in black and silver uniforms stood at attention. Servants in dark livery waited in neat rows. And at the top of the stone steps leading to the main entrance stood a man. Even from a distance, Eliza knew who he was. Duke Rowan Ashford. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the build of someone who trained with weapons regularly. His hair was black, cut short in military fashion. His face was all hard angles and sharp edges, as if carved from the same stone as his fortress. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, old but still visible. He wore black, like everything else in this place. Black coat, black vest, black trousers. No decoration except a single silver pin at his collar, the Ashford family crest. He watched the carriage approach with the same expression one might watch an enemy army. Alert, calculating, ready for violence. The carriage stopped. Marcus opened the door and offered his hand. Eliza took it and stepped out into the cold mountain air. Every eye in the courtyard was on her. She felt their judgment like physical weight. The broken southern girl, the infertile bride bought to fill some dark purpose. Eliza lifted her chin and walked forward, her spine straight, her steps measured. If they expected her to cower, they would be disappointed. She climbed the steps until she stood face to face with her new husband. Duke Rowan Ashford looked down at her. He had at least 8 inches of height on her, and for a long moment said nothing. His eyes were gray, the color of storm clouds and steel. They swept over her in cold assessment. Then he spoke, his voice deep and roughened, as if he wasn't used to using it. "You're smaller than I expected." Not a greeting, not a welcome, just an observation. Eliza met his gaze without flinching. "And you're exactly as terrifying as the rumors suggested. I suppose we're both getting what we bargained for." Something flickered in those gray eyes, surprise maybe, or the faintest hint of amusement. "Come inside," he said abruptly, turning toward the entrance. "We need to talk." Not, "Welcome to your new home," not, "Let me show you around." Just, "We need to talk," as if this were a business negotiation, which Eliza supposed it was. She followed him through the heavy oak doors and into the fortress that would either become her prison or her kingdom. She hadn't decided which yet. The Duke's study was a fortress within a fortress. Stone walls, no windows, a single door reinforced with iron bands. The furniture was heavy and utilitarian, a massive desk scarred with use, leather chairs cracked from age, shelves lined with ledgers and maps instead of decorative books. A fire burned in the hearth, but it did nothing to soften the room's austere brutality. Eliza stood just inside the doorway, watching as Duke Rowan Ashford poured 2 glasses of dark amber liquid from a crystal decanter. He didn't ask if she wanted one. He simply set both glasses on the desk and gestured to the chair across from his. "Sit." Not a request, a command. Eliza sat, keeping her spine straight and her hands folded in her lap. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her intimidated, even though her heart was hammering against her ribs. The Duke settled into his own chair with the controlled movements of a predator. He picked up his glass but didn't drink, just studied her over the rim with those unsettling gray eyes. "Your father told you why I chose you," he said finally. "He told me you settled his debts in exchange for my hand. He didn't tell me why you'd want a wife who can't give you heirs." "Good. Then we can skip the lies." Rowan set down his glass with a sharp click. "I'll be direct, Miss Thornfield. In my family, children are death sentences." The bluntness of it struck Eliza silent. "My grandfather had 3 sons," Rowan continued, his voice flat and factual. "The eldest poisoned the second. The youngest hired assassins to kill them both. My father survived by luck and paranoia. He had 4 brothers, all dead before 30, murdered by cousins, uncles, each other. Inheritance in the Ashford line doesn't pass peacefully. It's taken." Eliza's throat had gone dry. "And you?" 3 attempts before I turned 18. 1 poisoning, 1 accident during a hunt, 1 direct assault in my own bedroom. His scarred jaw tightened. "I killed the last assassin myself. He was my uncle's son, 15 years old." The weight of that confession settled between them like a stone. "Every Ashford heir becomes a target the moment they're born," Rowan said. "Every marriage produces ammunition for rivals. Every child is leverage, a weakness, a liability. So I made a choice." He leaned forward, his gaze boring into hers. "No heirs, no children, no vulnerabilities for my enemies to exploit. And that's why you chose me." Understanding crystallized, sharp and cold. "Because I'm broken. Because you're protected." His correction was immediate and harsh. "You can't produce an heir, which means you're worthless to anyone plotting against me. You have no strategic value as a hostage. No one gains anything by harming you. In this family, that makes you the safest person in the entire bloodline." Eliza absorbed this, her mind working through the brutal logic. "You bought yourself a wife who can't be used as a weapon against you." "Yes." "And what do I get in this arrangement, besides the privilege of living in a fortress surrounded by people who want you dead?" Something that might have been respect flickered across Rowan's features. "Survival, freedom from your father's control, a position of power, if you're smart enough to seize it." "Power." The word tasted bitter. "I'm property you purchased. That's not power." "No," Rowan agreed, "but what you do with this position could be. I don't need a decorative wife, Miss Thornfield. I don't need someone to smile at parties and produce heirs. I need an ally, someone who can help me root out the rot in this estate before it collapses entirely. What rot? Instead of answering, Rowan stood and pulled a ledger from the shelf behind him. He dropped it on the desk between them with a heavy thud. The pages fell open, revealing columns of numbers in multiple hands, some neat, others barely legible. My estate accounts, he said grimly. 3 years of records. Look at them and tell me what you see. Eliza hesitated, then leaned forward. Her father had never let her near the Belhaven books. Women didn't handle such things. But she'd taught herself by stealing glimpses when he wasn't looking. Numbers had always made sense to her in ways people didn't. She scanned the entries, her eyes tracking the flow of income and expenses. Within minutes, patterns emerged. Discrepancies. Gaps that didn't add up. These grain purchases, she said slowly, pointing to a series of entries. The prices are inflated, nearly double the market rate. Keep going. And here, maintenance costs for the North Tower, but you're being charged for the same repairs every 3 months. Either your builders are incompetent or someone's pocketing the difference. Or both, Rowan said darkly. Eliza flipped through more pages, her pulse quickening as the scope of the problem revealed itself. This is systematic. Whoever's doing this has been bleeding your estate for years. How much have you lost? Rough estimate? Enough to bankrupt most noble houses twice over. I've been at war for the past 5 years, fighting border disputes and putting down rebellions. I didn't have time to notice my own steward was robbing me blind. Your steward? Former steward. I found him in the wine cellar 2 months ago with a knife in his back. Convenient timing. He died before I could question him about the missing funds. And before I could replace him, half my household staff resigned without explanation. The ones who stayed? Rowan's expression turned glacial. I don't trust any of them. Eliza sat back, processing this. So you're telling me I've been sold into a household full of thieves and potential assassins, managed by a duke who can't trust his own servants, in a family where murder is the standard method of succession. Yes. And you want me to do what exactly? Smile politely while someone poisons my tea? I want you to fix it. Rowan's voice cut through her sarcasm like a blade. You clearly have a head for numbers. You spotted problems in 5 minutes that took my auditors weeks to find. I need someone I can trust to take control of the accounts, root out the corruption, and rebuild this estate's infrastructure before everything collapses. Why would you trust me? You don't know me. I know your father sold you for 30,000 crowns. I know you have no allies here, no family support, no reason to betray me to my enemies because you have nowhere else to go. And I know... He paused, his gaze sharp. I know you're angry. I saw it the moment you stepped out of that carriage. Anger is useful. It's fuel. Eliza's hands tightened in her lap. He was right, and she hated that he was right. She was furious at her father, at the world, at the circumstances that had brought her here. But fury without direction was just destructive. Fury with purpose? That could be power. If I do this, she said carefully, if I take control of your household accounts and try to fix this disaster, what do I get? What do you want? Answers, truth, and autonomy. She met his eyes. I won't be another decoration in your fortress, Duke Ashford. If you want my help, I need real authority. Not permission, authority. The kind that doesn't require me to ask before I act. Rowan studied her for a long moment, then reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a ring. Heavy gold, set with a dark sapphire, carved with the Ashford crest. This was my mother's signet ring, he said, sliding it across the desk. It grants the bearer full authority to act in my name. Servants will obey you. Merchants will honor your contracts. Anyone who questions your decisions questions me. Eliza stared at the ring. It was a weapon, a shield, a key to a kind of power she'd never imagined holding. There's a catch, she said. Always is. Wear that ring, and you become a target. People will assume you have influence over me. They'll try to manipulate you, bribe you, threaten you, and if they decide you're a problem, he shrugged. They'll remove you. Like your steward. Exactly like my steward. Eliza picked up the ring, feeling its weight in her palm. Cold metal, hard stone. The physical embodiment of a dangerous gamble. She slipped it onto her finger. It was too large, meant for someone with bigger hands, but she could make it work. "Then I suppose we have a bargain," she said quietly. Rowan's expression didn't change, but something in his posture eased fractionally. "Good. You'll start tomorrow. Marcus will show you to your chambers. We'll announce the marriage formally at dinner tonight. The entire household will be present. After that, you're on your own." "Wait." Eliza stood as he did. "We're married? Already?" "Signed and sealed 3 days ago by proxy. Your father's signature, my signature, witnesses present. Legally binding." His gaze was unreadable. "Did you think there would be a ceremony?" "Of course not. This wasn't a marriage, it was a transaction. She'd been foolish to expect anything else." "I see," she said, keeping her voice level. "Then I suppose congratulations are in order, Your Grace. You've acquired exactly what you paid for." For just a moment, something almost like regret crossed Rowan's face. But it was gone so quickly Eliza might have imagined it. "Marcus will take you upstairs," he said, turning away. "Rest before dinner. You'll need your strength." The dismissal was clear. Eliza left the study, her mind racing and the heavy ring cold against her finger. Swat. The chambers Marcus led her to were in the east wing, 3 floors up, and far from the Duke's own rooms. The message was clear. This was a marriage in name only. No expectations, no intimacy, just business. Fine. Eliza preferred it that way. The rooms themselves were surprisingly comfortable. A sitting room with worn but quality furniture, a bedroom with a large 4-poster bed, even a small attached study with a desk and empty shelves. Everything was clean but impersonal, as if no one had lived here in years. "There's a bell pull if you need anything," Marcus said gruffly from the doorway. "Dinner is at 7 bells. Someone will come to escort you." "Marcus," Eliza turned to face him. "How many people in this household want the Duke dead?" The guard's expression didn't change. "Fewer than want him alive, but it's the minority you have to watch for." "That's not reassuring." "Wasn't meant to be, Your Grace." He gave her a short bow, acknowledging her new title, and left, closing the door behind him. "Your Grace, Duchess Eliza Ashford." She sat on the edge of the bed and looked down at the ring on her finger. 3 days ago, she'd been a worthless daughter, about to be erased from her family's ledger. Now she was a duchess with authority to command an entire household, and absolutely no idea how to use that power without getting herself killed. A knock at the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "Come in." A young woman entered, carrying an armful of dark fabric. She was perhaps 20, with auburn hair pinned beneath a simple cap and sharp green eyes that assessed Eliza with startling directness. "Your Grace, I'm Clara, assigned as your lady's maid. The Duke thought you might need something appropriate for dinner." She laid out the fabric, a dress in deep burgundy wool, far finer than anything Eliza had owned in years. "Thank you." Eliza studied the girl. "How long have you worked at Ironcrest?" 6 months, Your Grace. I came with the last group of hires after the departures." The mass resignation. Clara's expression remained carefully neutral. "Yes, Your Grace." "And what do you think happened to the steward, the one who died in the wine cellar?" The maid's hand stilled on the dress. "I think he stole from the wrong person and paid for it." "Do you know who killed him?" "No, Your Grace, but I know he wasn't well liked. Cruel to the lower staff, took bribes from suppliers. If he was murdered, the list of suspects would fill a ledger." Honest. Eliza appreciated that. "Can I trust you, Clara?" The girl met her eyes directly. "I don't know yet, Your Grace. Can you trust anyone in this house?" A fair answer. Eliza nodded. "Help me dress. And while you do, tell me everything you know about the household hierarchy. Names, positions, who hates whom. I want details." Clara's mouth curved into the faintest smile. "This might take a while, Your Grace." "Then we'd better start now, Sat." Dinner was a trial by fire. The great hall was a cavernous space of stone and shadow, dominated by a long table that could seat 50 but tonight held only 20. Torches burned in iron sconces along the walls, casting flickering light that made everyone look sinister. The household's senior staff had assembled. The housekeeper, Mrs. Talbot, a severe woman with iron-gray hair and a mouth like a knife wound. The master-at-arms, Captain Varick, built like a bear and twice as dangerous-looking. The head cook, Master Brennan, round and red-faced, and a dozen others whose names and titles blurred together. They all stood when Eliza entered on Rowan's arm. She felt their stares, their judgment, the broken Southern bride, the infertile duchess, the girl who'd been bought like livestock. Rowan led her to the head of the table, seating her at his right hand, the position of honor, whether she'd earned it or not. "This is Duchess Eliza Ashford," he announced, his voice carrying through the hall with military precision. "My wife. She speaks with my authority in all household matters. You will obey her as you would obey me. Is that understood?" A chorus of "Yes, Your Grace" echoed back, but Eliza heard the undercurrent of resentment. They didn't want to obey her. They didn't respect her. She was an outsider, an imposition, a complication in their carefully balanced world. Good. Resentment she could work with. Resentment meant they underestimated her. The meal began. Servants brought course after course: roasted venison, root vegetables, dark bread, sharp cheese. The food was hearty and well prepared, far better than what Belhaven's failing kitchens had produced. Eliza ate sparingly, hyper-aware of every eye on her. Conversation was stilted and formal. People spoke around her, not to her. Halfway through the main course, Mrs. Talbot cleared her throat. "Your Grace." The housekeeper's voice was carefully polite, but her eyes were cold. "I understand you'll be reviewing the household accounts." "Yes." "With respect, Your Grace, those books are quite complex. Perhaps you might benefit from guidance. I've managed the household budget for 15 years. I'd be happy to explain. I'm sure the Duchess can manage," Rowan cut in, his tone making it clear the subject was closed. But Eliza saw the flash of anger in Mrs. Talbot's eyes before the woman lowered her gaze. First enemy identified. The dinner dragged on. Eliza fielded veiled insults disguised as questions, deflected patronizing offers of help, and endured the weight of 20 pairs of eyes analyzing her every move. By the time dessert arrived, a dense spice cake with cream, her head was pounding and her jaw ached from keeping her expression pleasant. Then Captain Varick spoke up. "Your Grace," he addressed Rowan, not Eliza. "We've had reports of activity in the Southern Pass. Might be bandits, might be scouts from House Morven. I'd like to increase patrols." "Do it." "That will require pulling men from the eastern wall, which means—" "I'm aware of the trade-offs, Captain. Make it happen." Varick nodded, but his gaze slid to Eliza. "Dangerous times to be bringing new people into the fortress, Your Grace. Security becomes complicated." The implication was clear. She was a liability. A risk. "Then, perhaps," Eliza said quietly, and the entire table went silent. The captain should focus on securing the perimeter rather than questioning the Duke's decisions. Every head turned toward her. Rowan's expression remained neutral, but she saw the corner of his mouth twitch. Varick's face darkened. "I meant no disrespect, Your Grace." "Of course not," Eliza smiled, cold and sharp. "Just as I meant no disrespect in pointing out that security concerns are meaningless if the estate collapses from internal rot before any external enemy strikes. Which brings me to a question." She turned to Mrs. Talbot. "The grain purchases recorded in last quarter's accounts. Who approved those expenditures?" The housekeeper's expression froze. That would have been the steward, Your Grace." "The dead steward? How convenient." Eliza pulled a folded paper from her sleeve, notes she'd made earlier. "Because these prices are double the market rate. Either he was spectacularly incompetent or someone was taking a very generous cut. I'd like the names of the suppliers by tomorrow morning." Mrs. Talbot's face had gone white. "Your Grace, I don't have direct access to—" "Then get access. You have 15 years of experience, after all. Surely you can manage something so simple." The silence in the hall was absolute. No one moved. No one breathed. Rowan picked up his wine glass, studying Eliza over the rim with an expression that might have been approval, or amusement, or both. "You heard the Duchess," he said mildly. "Supplier names. Tomorrow morning." Mrs. Talbot's mouth worked soundlessly for a moment before she managed a stiff nod. "Yes, Your Grace." Eliza set down her fork, her hand steady despite the adrenaline screaming through her veins. She'd just made a very dangerous move, challenged the housekeeper in front of the entire senior staff, declared open war on the corruption that had been bleeding this estate dry. There would be consequences. She knew that. But backing down now would mean losing what little authority she had before she'd even begun to use it. The rest of dinner passed in tense silence. When the meal finally ended and the staff dispersed, Rowan walked Eliza back to her chambers. They didn't speak until they reached her door. "That was bold," he said. "That was necessary." Eliza turned to face him. "If I'd let her brush me off, everyone would know I'm powerless. Your ring means nothing if I don't use it. Mrs. Talbot has been with this household for 15 years. She has allies, loyalties. You just made her your enemy." "She was already my enemy. I just made it official." Rowan studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Fair enough. But watch your back, Duchess. The knives in this house don't always come from the front." "I'm aware." Eliza met his gaze. "Question. Do you actually trust me, or is this some elaborate test to see if I'll get myself killed?" His expression didn't change. "I trust that our interests align. We both want this estate functional and secure. Everything else is details." "That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're getting." He stepped back. "Get some rest. Tomorrow you start going through the account books properly. Marcus will assign you a guard." "I don't need a guard." "You do now. You just declared war on half my household staff." He turned to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth? That was well played. Ruthless, but smart. My mother would have liked you." Before Eliza could respond, he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. She entered her chambers and locked the door behind her, her heart still racing. Clara appeared from the bedroom, eyes wide. "Your Grace, the entire servants' hall is talking. They're saying you challenged Mrs. Talbot directly, that you humiliated her." "Good." Eliza pulled off the heavy ring and set it on the desk. Her finger was sore where the metal had pressed against skin. "Let them talk. Let them worry. Because tomorrow, I'm going to tear through those account books and find every single person who's been stealing from this estate. And then," she looked at Clara, "then we're going to burn them out like infection from a wound." Clara's eyes gleamed. "I know where the full records are kept, Your Grace. The ones Mrs. Talbot doesn't want you to see." "Show me." "Now?" "Right now, while everyone's still recovering from dinner." Eliza picked up a candle. "Lead the way." They moved through the silent corridors like ghosts, Clara navigating the maze of hallways with practiced ease. Down 2 flights of stairs, through a servant's passage, into the bowels of the fortress where the stone walls wept with moisture and the air smelled of mildew and old paper. The records room was locked. Clara produced a key from somewhere in her apron. "How did you—" "The old steward liked his wine, and when he drank, he got careless with his keys." Clara pushed open the door. "I made copies. Just in case." Just in case. This girl was full of surprises. The room was crammed with ledgers, loose papers, boxes of receipts, and contracts dating back decades. A lifetime of estate management compressed into one chaotic space. Eliza set down her candle and pulled out the most recent ledger. Then another. And another. For hours, she and Clara worked in silence, comparing entries, tracking discrepancies, building a map of corruption that spread like rot through every level of the household. Grain purchases, maintenance contracts, staff wages, supply orders. Every single category showed systematic inflation, kickbacks, theft disguised as legitimate expenses. "It's not just Mrs. Talbot," Eliza whispered, her throat tight with fury. "It's half the senior staff. They've been working together, bleeding the estate dry while the Duke was at war." "What do we do?" Eliza looked at the evidence spread before her. Proof. Undeniable proof. But proof alone wouldn't be enough. She needed leverage, strategy, a way to dismantle this network without triggering a complete collapse of the household. A sound in the hallway froze them both. Footsteps. Getting closer. Clara blew out the candle, plunging them into darkness. Eliza's heart hammered as the footsteps stopped just outside the door. The handle turned. A figure entered, carrying a lamp. The light fell across a familiar face. Marcus. The guard's eyes swept the room, taking in the scattered ledgers, the 2 women standing frozen in the darkness. "Your Grace," he said quietly, "you should come with me. Now." "Why?" "Because there are 3 men in the East Corridor who weren't there an hour ago. They're armed, they're not on the duty roster, and they're heading toward your chambers." His expression was grim. Someone knows you've been asking questions, and they've decided to do something about it. Eliza's blood went cold. How much time do we have? Minutes, maybe less. She grabbed the most damning ledgers, shoving them under her cloak. Clara, go back to the servants' quarters. Say nothing about this. Your Grace, go. That's an order. Clara fled into the darkness. Marcus gestured sharply, and Eliza followed him through a different passage, moving fast and silent. Behind them, she heard voices, angry, searching. They were hunting her. Marcus led her through a maze of corridors she'd never seen, maintenance passages, old servant routes, the hidden arteries of the fortress. Finally, they emerged into a tower stairwell. He pushed her into a small alcove and stood guard, his hand on his sword. Stay quiet, he breathed. Footsteps echoed in the stairwell. Multiple sets. Getting closer. Eliza pressed herself against the cold stone, barely breathing, the stolen ledgers heavy against her chest. The footsteps passed, faded, disappeared. Marcus waited another full minute before stepping back. They'll keep searching. You can't go back to your chambers tonight. Then where? The Duke's wing. No one will dare search there. Of course. The one place in the entire fortress where she'd be completely safe was with the man she'd married for convenience and survival. They moved quickly through the silent fortress. No more voices, no more footsteps, but Eliza could feel eyes watching from the shadows. The household knew she'd found something, and they were afraid of what she might do with it. Marcus delivered her to Rowan's door and knocked once, sharp and urgent. The Duke appeared, still dressed, a sword in his hand. His eyes took in Eliza's disheveled state, the ledgers clutched to her chest, Marcus's grim expression. What happened? Someone sent men to her chambers, Marcus reported. Armed, not guards. Rowan's expression went cold and deadly. How many? 3 that I saw. Find them, and when you do, bring them to me alive. The order was spoken in a voice that promised violence. I want to know who gave the order. Marcus nodded and disappeared into the darkness. Rowan pulled Eliza inside and locked the door behind her. His chambers were sparse: bed, desk, weapons rack. A soldier's room. You've been here less than a day, he said, setting down his sword, and you've already triggered an assassination attempt. I'm almost impressed. I found the records. Eliza's voice shook despite her best efforts. The real ones. It's worse than you thought. Mrs. Talbot, the master at arms, half the senior staff, they've been stealing for years, hundreds of thousands of crowns, maybe more. Show me. She spread the ledgers across his desk, pointing out the patterns she'd identified. Rowan studied them in silence, his expression growing darker with each page. They've been working together, she explained. A conspiracy, probably since before your father died. They've been treating this estate like their personal treasury. And when you started asking questions, they decided you were a problem. Rowan's jaw clenched. This is my fault. I should have dealt with this before bringing you here. You couldn't have known I'd move this fast. I should have protected you better. The words hung between them, unexpected, almost gentle. Eliza looked up to find him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Why did you really choose me? She asked quietly. The truth this time. Rowan was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. Because everyone in my life has wanted something from me. Power, money, position, heirs to secure their own futures. But you, he gestured at the ledgers. You can't give me heirs. You have nothing to gain by manipulating me. You're the only person in this entire fortress who has no incentive to see me dead or controlled. That makes you the only person I can come close to trusting. That's a lonely way to live. It's the only way to survive in this family. Eliza looked at him. This man who'd bought her like property, but was now the only barrier between her and a knife in the dark. This stranger who'd given her power and expected her to wield it. This husband who was also somehow, impossibly, becoming an ally. What do we do now? She asked. Rowan's expression hardened into something cold and calculating. Now we set a trap. We let them think they've scared you off. Let them believe you're too frightened to continue. And while they're relaxing, he smiled, and it was not a kind expression. We burn out every single one of them. Eliza felt something fierce and bright ignite in her chest. Not fear, not despair, rage, purpose, the beginning of something that might in time become power. "Then let's begin," she said. The trap took 3 days to set. 3 days of Eliza playing the frightened bride, keeping to her chambers, speaking to no one except Clara. 3 days of whispered rumors spreading through Ironcrest's corridors like poison. The new Duchess had been terrified by unnamed threats, had retreated into silence, would cause no more trouble. 3 days of watching the household staff relax, their vigilance softening as they convinced themselves the problem had resolved itself. 3 days of sharpening knives in the dark. Eliza sat at the desk in Rowan's study. She'd been sleeping in his chambers since the assassination attempt, though he'd given her the bed and taken the floor without discussion, and studied the web of corruption she'd mapped across stolen ledgers and smuggled documents. Clara had been invaluable, slipping through the servants' passages like smoke, gathering whispered conversations and carelessly discarded evidence. The conspiracy was larger than Eliza had imagined. Mrs. Talbot was the architect, yes, but she had help. Captain Varick controlled which guard rotation saw what. Master Brennan inflated food costs and split the profits. Even the stable master had been skimming funds meant for horse care. A coordinated effort spanning years, bleeding the Ashford estate of hundreds of thousands of crowns, while Rowan fought wars on the border. But that wasn't the worst discovery. The worst discovery was the letters. Eliza unfolded one now, her hands steady, despite the fury burning in her chest. The handwriting was elegant, educated, familiar. The new Duchess poses no real threat. She is young, inexperienced, and isolated. Continue as planned. By spring, the Ashford finances will collapse entirely, and our associate will be positioned to acquire the Northern Territories at a fraction of their value. Remain patient. E.T. E.T. Edmund Thornfield. Her father. The letter was dated 2 weeks before her wedding, before she'd even arrived at Ironcrest. Her father had been corresponding with Mrs. Talbot, coordinating the estate's systematic destruction from hundreds of miles away. He hadn't just sold her to clear his debts. He'd sold her as part of a conspiracy to destroy the man who'd bought her. Eliza set down the letter, her vision swimming. She'd known her father was cruel, selfish, willing to sacrifice her for his own benefit. But this was calculated malice on a scale that stole her breath. "You've gone quiet." Rowan's voice pulled her back. He stood in the doorway, still wearing his training leathers, a sheen of sweat on his brow. He'd been in the practice yard for hours, working through forms with brutal intensity. Eliza had learned that was how he processed anger, through violence directed at straw dummies instead of people. "I found something," she said, her voice hollow. "You're going to want to see this." She slid the letter across the desk. Rowan read it in silence, his expression unchanging. When he finished, he set it down with careful precision and looked at her. "Your father?" "Yes." "He's been coordinating with Mrs. Talbot since before you arrived, possibly longer." Rowan's voice was flat, but Eliza heard the rage beneath it. "He sold you to me as part of a plan to bankrupt my estate and enable someone, probably House Morven, they've been circling like vultures for years, to buy up my territories." "I didn't know." The words came out defensive, almost pleading. "I swear I didn't know." "I believe you." Rowan's response was immediate and firm. "If you'd known, you wouldn't have been tearing through the account books looking for corruption. You would have been facilitating it." Eliza's throat tightened. "He used me. Again. Even after selling me, he's still using me as a weapon against—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Rowan circled the desk and crouched beside her chair, bringing himself to eye level. It was the first time he'd deliberately made himself smaller, less intimidating. The gesture caught her off guard. "Listen to me," he said quietly. "Your father's sins are not yours. What he did, what he planned, none of that is your fault. You were as much a victim of his scheming as I was. But I'm still the knife he put in your house. No, you're the woman who found the conspiracy and brought me evidence. There's a difference." His gray eyes were steady, certain. "The question is, what do we do about it?" Eliza took a shaky breath, forcing herself to think past the betrayal. "We use it. If my father thinks I'm just a pawn, an unwitting tool in his plan, then he won't see me coming when I turn on him. Dangerous. If we move against him directly, we expose our hand to Mrs. Talbot and whoever else is involved. They'll scatter or destroy evidence. Then we don't move against him directly. Eliza's mind was racing now, pieces falling into place. We make him come to us. We stage a crisis that forces him to reveal himself. Rowan's expression sharpened with interest. What kind of crisis? The kind where it looks like you're falling apart, losing control. Eliza stood, pacing now, energy flooding back into her limbs. We let the household staff see cracks, arguments between us, signs that the marriage is fracturing. We make it look like I'm isolated, desperate, reaching out to my father for help. And when he arrives, we spring the trap, but not just on him, on everyone involved, all at once. No warning, no escape. She turned to face Rowan. Can you make it convincing? The appearance of weakness? A cold smile curved his mouth. Duchess, I've been playing weak for 3 years while I figured out who was stealing from me. I can play it a few days longer. The performance began that night at dinner. Eliza arrived late, her eyes red-rimmed as if she'd been crying. She wore a plain gray dress instead of the richer fabrics Rowan had provided. Her hair was pulled back severely. She looked small, diminished, defeated, exactly as planned. Rowan barely acknowledged her arrival, his attention fixed on Captain Varick as they discussed patrol schedules. When Eliza took her seat, he didn't look at her. The message was clear. The Duke had lost interest in his broken bride. Mrs. Talbot's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. Halfway through the meal, Eliza spoke up. Your Grace. Her voice was soft, hesitant. About the household accounts. I've been reviewing them as you asked, and I'm afraid I may have made some errors in my initial assessment. Perhaps Mrs. Talbot was right. Perhaps I need more guidance before— The accounts are your responsibility now, Rowan said curtly, cutting her off. I don't have time to hold your hand through basic mathematics. The table went silent. Several staff members exchanged glances. Eliza's cheeks flushed, genuine embarrassment mixed with performed humiliation. Of course, Your Grace. I only thought— Don't think. Just do the work I assigned you. Rowan turned back to Varick, dismissing her entirely. Mrs. Talbot's smile was a razor hidden in silk. Your Grace, if I might offer assistance. I know the Duchess is doing her best, but managing an estate of this size requires experience she simply doesn't have yet. Fine, Rowan waved a hand dismissively. Work with her. Make sure she doesn't destroy what little financial stability we have left. The housekeeper's victory was so complete she didn't even try to hide it. Of course, Your Grace, it would be my pleasure. Eliza kept her eyes on her plate, playing the defeated wife to perfection. Inside, she was counting, calculating, watching who relaxed, who leaned in, who took the bait. All of them. After dinner, Mrs. Talbot cornered her in the corridor outside the great hall. Your Grace, a word. Eliza turned, making sure her posture was uncertain, almost fearful. Mrs. Talbot, I wanted to say, I understand how difficult this transition must be for you. A new household, a husband who is, shall we say, demanding in his expectations. It's a great deal of pressure for someone so young and inexperienced. The housekeeper's voice dripped false sympathy. If you ever need someone to talk to, someone who understands how things work here, my door is always open. Thank you, Eliza said quietly. That's very kind. I admit I've been feeling rather alone here. Of course you have. You're far from home, far from family. Mrs. Talbot patted her arm with maternal condescension. Perhaps it would help to write to your father. I'm sure he'd be concerned about your welfare. There it was, the hook. I've thought about it, Eliza admitted. But I don't want to worry him, or make the Duke angry. What his Grace doesn't know won't hurt him, and your father deserves to know you're safe, or— Mrs. Talbot's pause was delicate, calculated. If you're not safe, he deserves to know that too. Eliza let uncertainty flicker across her face. You really think I should write to him? I think a daughter should always be able to reach out to her father when she needs help, don't you? Yes, Eliza said softly. Yes, I suppose you're right. Mrs. Talbot's smile was triumphant. I'll make sure any letters you write are sent discreetly. No need to trouble the Duke with such personal matters. You're very kind, Mrs. Talbot. Not at all, Your Grace. I only want to help. They parted ways, and Eliza continued to her chambers, Rowan's chambers, her heart racing. The trap was set. Now they just had to wait for the prey to walk into it. The letter Eliza wrote to her father was a masterpiece of calculated desperation. Father, I am writing to you in secret, as I fear the Duke's reaction if he knew I'd reached out. You were right about him. He is cruel, dismissive, and volatile. The household here is hostile, and I am isolated with no allies. I have tried to fulfill the duties assigned to me, managing the estate accounts as he demanded, but I fear I have uncovered something that puts me in terrible danger. There are discrepancies I don't understand. Corruption that seems to reach the highest levels of staff. When I tried to discuss it with the Duke, he accused me of incompetence and threatened to send me away. I don't know what to do. Please, if you can, come. I need your counsel. I need help. Your daughter, Eliza. She showed it to Rowan before sealing it. Perfect, he said, reading it over. Frightened enough to be believable. Specific enough to make him think you've stumbled onto the conspiracy, but don't understand what you're seeing. Will he come? Oh, he'll come. Rowan's smile was cold. He can't afford not to. If you actually understand what you've found, you're a threat to the entire plan. He'll need to assess the damage, control the situation, or control me, or remove you entirely. Rowan's expression darkened. Which is why we'll be ready. The letter was sent through Mrs. Talbot's discreet channels, which meant it went straight to her co-conspirators and was almost certainly read before being forwarded to Lord Thornfield. Exactly as intended. They waited. 2 days later, a response arrived. Mrs. Talbot delivered it personally, her expression carefully sympathetic as she handed Eliza the sealed envelope. From your father, Your Grace. I hope it brings you comfort. Thank you. Eliza broke the seal with shaking hands, genuine nervousness now because she was about to read words from the man who'd sold her and then tried to use her as a weapon. The letter was brief. Eliza, I am distressed to hear of your difficulties. As your father, it is my duty to ensure your welfare, even in your new circumstances. I will arrive at Ironcrest within the week to discuss these matters with the Duke personally. In the meantime, be careful what you say and to whom. Trust no one. E.T. Trust no one. The irony would have been laughable if it weren't so vicious. Eliza looked up at Mrs. Talbot. He's coming. He wants to speak with the Duke. Of course, a father's concern for his daughter. The housekeeper's smile was poison wrapped in sugar. I'm sure everything will be resolved once they talk. Yes, Eliza thought. It will be after Amachiet. Lord Edmund Thornfield arrived on a gray morning, 6 days later, with a retinue of 4 men and an air of patrician authority that made the Ironcrest servant straighten unconsciously. Eliza watched from a tower window as his carriage rolled through the gates. Her hands were clenched so tightly on the stone sill that her knuckles had gone white. Breathe. Rowan's voice came from behind her. He'd moved silently, a habit from years of watching his back. Don't let him see how much this affects you. He sold me. Then he tried to destroy you, and now he's walking into your fortress expecting hospitality and negotiation. Her voice was tight with barely controlled rage. How am I supposed to breathe? By remembering that he's already lost. He just doesn't know it yet. Rowan moved to stand beside her, watching the courtyard below. We have the evidence. We have the witnesses. All we need is for him to incriminate himself publicly, and this entire conspiracy collapses. And if he doesn't, then we make him. The plan was simple in concept, brutal in execution. Tonight, there would be a formal dinner, the entire household in attendance, plus Lord Thornfield and his men. During the meal, Eliza would present her findings from the account books, carefully edited to look like amateur discoveries that missed the full scope. Her father would be forced to respond, to either defend the corruption or distance himself from it. Either way, his reaction would reveal his involvement, and then Rowan would spring the real trap. But first, they had to survive the initial confrontation. Lord Thornfield was shown to the Great Hall, where Rowan waited with Marcus and 2 other guards. Eliza entered from a side door, playing the dutiful wife summoned to greet her father. She hadn't seen him since the night he'd sold her. 3 weeks that felt like 3 years. He looked the same. silver-touched hair, cold eyes, the expression of a man perpetually calculating the value of everything around him. "Father." Eliza dipped her head in acknowledgement, not quite a bow. "Eliza." His gaze swept over her, assessing. "You look well. Marriage seems to agree with you." A lie. She looked pale and thin, shadows under her eyes from nights spent poring over ledgers and planning. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. "Of course. When my daughter writes asking for help, I come." Lord Thornfield turned to Rowan, his expression shifting to something more guarded. "Your Grace, I apologize for the unexpected visit, but Eliza's letter concerned me. She mentioned difficulties adjusting to her new role." "Did she?" Rowan's voice was flat. "My wife has been having difficulties with many things lately, including understanding her place in this household." Eliza flinched, a calculated gesture, but one that made her father's eyes narrow. "Perhaps we might discuss this privately," Lord Thornfield suggested, "as men of the world, without troubling Eliza further." "No." The word came from Eliza, surprising them both. "I want to be present. These are my concerns. I should be part of the discussion." Her father's expression darkened. "Eliza, this is not appropriate." "She stays." Rowan's interruption was final. "Duchess Ashford has been managing the household accounts, as is her right. If there are concerns about her performance, she should hear them directly." Lord Thornfield's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Very well. Then perhaps we should move to somewhere more private. I'd prefer not to air family matters in front of the guards." They relocated to Rowan's study. The moment the door closed, Lord Thornfield's carefully maintained facade cracked. "What exactly have you been doing, Eliza?" He didn't raise his voice. He never did. But the cold fury in his tone was unmistakable. "I send you here with one simple instruction: don't cause problems. And within 2 weeks, you're rifling through account books and writing panicked letters about corruption?" "I was following the Duke's orders," Eliza said, keeping her voice steady. "He asked me to review the estate finances. I found discrepancies. You found nothing." "You're a foolish girl playing at estate management without the faintest understanding of how these things work." "Lord Thornfield," Rowan's voice cut through the tension like a blade, "you will not speak to my wife that way in my house." Edmund turned on him. "Your wife is my daughter. I know her limitations better than anyone. She is infertile, inexperienced, and entirely unsuited to the responsibilities you've apparently thrust upon her. And yet she's discovered more corruption in 2 weeks than my auditors found in 3 years. Rowan crossed his arms. "Either she's remarkably competent, or your assessment of her abilities is deliberately inaccurate. Which is it?" The question hung in the air like a drawn sword. Lord Thornfield's expression smoothed into cold calculation. "I think, Your Grace, that you and I should speak alone, man to man. There are matters regarding this marriage contract that perhaps weren't made entirely clear during negotiations." "No," Eliza stepped forward. "Anything you have to say, you can say in front of me." "Eliza, be silent. This doesn't concern—" "It absolutely concerns me." The rage Eliza had been suppressing for weeks exploded out of her. "You sold me like livestock, and now you're trying to manage me like I'm property you still own. I'm not. I'm the Duchess of Ashford, and you're a guest in my house, and you will speak to me with respect or you will leave." Lord Thornfield stared at her as if she'd grown a second head. "Your house? You've been here barely 3 weeks, and you think— I think I found evidence of systematic theft totaling nearly 500,000 crowns. I think I discovered a conspiracy involving multiple senior staff members. And I think—" She pulled out the letter, the one with his handwriting, his signature. "I think you've been a part of it from the beginning." She slapped the letter down on Rowan's desk. Her father's face went white, then red, then a mottled purple that suggested his carefully maintained control was fracturing. "Where did you get that?" "From Mrs. Talbot's private files, along with a dozen others just like it." Eliza's voice was steady now, cold with certainty. "You didn't sell me to clear debts. You sold me to plant a spy in the Duke's household, someone who would be dismissed as incompetent and harmless while your allies bled his estate dry. And when the finances collapsed, your associate, House Morven, I assume, would buy up the Ashford territories for pennies on the crown. You have no idea what you're talking about. Don't. Rowan's voice cracked like a whip. Don't insult our intelligence by denying it. We have the letters. We have the ledgers. We have testimony from servants who were bribed or threatened into cooperation. We know everything. Lord Thornfield looked between them, and Eliza saw the moment he realized the trap had closed. This is absurd, he said, but his voice had lost its certainty. Accusations based on misinterpreted correspondence? Then let's test that interpretation. Rowan moved to the door and opened it. Marcus, bring them in. Marcus entered, followed by 2 guards escorting Mrs. Talbot. The housekeeper's face was ashen, her hands bound in front of her. What is the meaning of this? Lord Thornfield demanded. Mrs. Talbot has been very cooperative, Rowan said. Once we explained the consequences of continuing to lie, she's confirmed everything, the conspiracy, the kickbacks, your involvement as the architect behind the entire scheme. Mrs. Talbot wouldn't meet Edmund's eyes. I'm sorry, my lord, they have too much evidence. I couldn't— Be silent! Edmund's composure shattered completely. He rounded on Rowan. You think you can threaten me? Coerce testimony from servants? I am a lord of this kingdom. I have connections, allies, influence that reaches— Stop! Eliza's voice cut through his bluster. Just stop. You don't have allies anymore. You have co-conspirators who are all about to turn on each other to save themselves. And you— She stepped closer to her father, looking him directly in the eye. You have nothing, no leverage, no power over me, not anymore. Edmund's hand moved so fast, Eliza barely saw it. One moment he was standing 3 feet away. The next, his fingers were locked around her throat, squeezing, his face twisted with rage. You ungrateful little— Rowan hit him. The sound of the impact was like a thunderclap in the confined space. Edmund staggered backward, releasing Eliza, blood streaming from his nose. Marcus had his sword drawn in an instant, the tip at Edmund's throat before he could recover. Don't. Rowan's voice was deadly quiet. Don't touch her. Don't speak to her. Don't even look at her. You are in my fortress, surrounded by my men, with absolutely no cards left to play. The only reason you're still breathing is because I want you alive to face public judgment for what you've done. Eliza rubbed her throat, coughing. Clara appeared from somewhere. Had she been listening outside? And wrapped a supportive arm around Eliza's shoulders. Tonight, Rowan continued, there will be a formal dinner. You will attend. The entire household will bear witness as we present evidence of this conspiracy. You will have the opportunity to defend yourself. And then, his smile was cold and final. Then we'll see what your influence and connections are really worth. The great hall had never been so crowded. Every member of the household staff was present, from the lowest scullery maid to the most senior advisor. Lord Thornfield and his men sat at one end of the long table, surrounded by Rowan's guards. Not quite prisoners, but not quite guests either. Mrs. Talbot sat nearby, still bound, her face a mask of defeated resignation. Eliza stood beside Rowan at the head of the table, her throat still bearing faint bruises from her father's assault. She wore burgundy tonight, not gray, not pale colors of submission, rich, dark red like spilled wine or drying blood. Rowan raised his hand and the hall fell silent. We are here tonight to address a matter of treason, theft, and conspiracy that has infected this household for years. Evidence will be presented, testimony will be heard, and justice— His gaze swept the room. Justice will be served. He nodded to Eliza. She stepped forward, her voice clear and steady. For the next hour, she laid out the conspiracy in excruciating detail. The inflated grain purchases, the fraudulent maintenance contracts, the stolen wages, every transaction, every falsified entry, every crown that had been siphoned from the Ashford coffers into the pockets of conspirators. She presented the letters, read them aloud, showed how her father had orchestrated the entire scheme from hundreds of miles away, using his daughter as an unwitting tool. The household listened in stunned silence. Some looked shocked, others guilty. A few had clearly known, and those few were identified by Marcus's guards and quietly escorted from the hall. When Eliza finally finished, she turned to her father. Do you deny any of this? Lord Edmund Thornfield sat very still, his expression carved from ice. I deny nothing. Nor do I apologize. You were worthless to me, Eliza. A barren failure who couldn't even fulfill the most basic function expected of a woman. I used you because you had no other value. And if you think exposing this changes anything, it changes everything. Eliza's voice didn't rise, but it filled the hall. Because you're wrong. I wasn't worthless. I was underestimated. There's a difference. She pulled out the family ledger, her father's ledger, the one she'd watched him write in that rainy night, the one that had recorded her as sold. You erased me from your family. You sold me like property. She opened the ledger to the page with her name. Now I'm erasing you from mine. In front of the entire assembly, Eliza took a pen and drew a single black line through her father's name. Not her own. His, striking him from the record as completely and finally as he'd struck her. I am no longer your daughter, she said quietly. I am Eliza Ashford, Duchess of Ironcrest. And you... She looked at him with eyes that held no love, no hate, only cold finality. You are nothing to me. The hall erupted. Lord Thornfield lunged to his feet, but Marcus's guards were faster, forcing him back into his seat. Staff members shouted questions, denials, accusations at each other. The conspiracy was unraveling in real time, threads pulling loose as people turned on their co-conspirators to save themselves. In the chaos, Eliza felt a hand on her shoulder. Rowan, steady and solid. Well done, he murmured. But Eliza was still watching her father, watching as the reality of his situation crashed down on him. He would face trial, his estates would be confiscated, his name would become synonymous with betrayal and failure. Everything he'd schemed for had crumbled to ash. And then Edmund smiled. It was a terrible smile, full of venom and one final card to play. You think you've won, he said, loud enough to cut through the noise. The hall went silent again. You think you've exposed everything, but you stupid, stupid girl, you have no idea what's really happening here. Eliza's blood went cold. What are you talking about? Do you really believe Mrs. Talbot was my only ally in this fortress? That I would put all my faith in a housekeeper and a few corrupt servants? Edmund leaned forward. There's another player, someone with real power. Someone who's been working with me from the very beginning, who you haven't even suspected. Who? Rowan's voice was deadly. Ask your loyal guard captain. Edmund's smile widened. Ask Captain Varick why he's been so interested in your patrol schedules, why he's been ensuring certain sections of wall are undermanned on specific nights. Ask him who he's been meeting with in the Southern Pass. Every head turned toward Captain Varick. The master-at-arms sat frozen, his face unreadable. Then slowly his hand moved toward his sword. Don't. Marcus had his blade drawn in an instant, along with a dozen other guards. Don't even think about it. But Varick wasn't looking at them. He was looking at the hall's main entrance, where the heavy doors suddenly swung open. Armed men poured in. Not Ashford guards. Soldiers in the colors of House Morven, black and gold, bearing weapons and moving with military precision. At their head walked a woman in expensive armor, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe braid, a cruel smile on her aristocratic face. Lady Helena Morven, head of House Morven and Rowan's most dangerous rival. Hello, cousin, she said pleasantly, as if she'd just arrived for tea instead of an armed invasion. I believe you have something that belongs to me. The trap hadn't just closed on Lord Thornfield, it had closed on all of them. 20 armed soldiers, one exit, and Lady Helena Morven standing in the doorway like she owned the entire fortress. Eliza's mind raced through calculations. Rowan had 40 guards in the hall, but they were scattered throughout the room, interspersed with household staff and unarmed servants. A fight here would be a massacre of innocents caught in the crossfire. Helena knew it too. Her smile was all teeth and victory. I apologize for the dramatic entrance, she said, strolling into the hall as if she'd been invited. But when I heard there was a family gathering, I simply couldn't resist joining. After all, we're practically family, aren't we, Rowan? Third cousins, if I remember the genealogy correctly. What do you want, Helena? Rowan's voice was cold, but Eliza heard the tension beneath it. His hand hovered near his sword, but he didn't draw. Not yet. What I've always wanted. What should have been mine by right. Helena gestured around the hall. Ironcrest, the Northern Territories, the Ashford Holdings. You see, cousin, Your father made a terrible mistake when he named you heir instead of acknowledging the Morven claim. We share the same great-grandfather. My bloodline is just as legitimate as yours. Your bloodline is a cousin branch that lost its inheritance rights 2 generations ago when your grandfather committed treason. Treason, Helena laughed. Such an ugly word for political disagreement. But semantics aside, here we are. You've been so busy fighting border wars and chasing bandits that you failed to notice the rot consuming your estate from within. Meanwhile, I've been patient, building alliances, waiting for the perfect moment to... She paused, catching sight of Eliza. Oh, you must be the new Duchess. The infertile bride Edmund was so eager to sell. Tell me, dear, how does it feel to be the pawn that destroyed your own husband's house? Eliza met her gaze without flinching. I wouldn't know. I'm not the pawn in this scenario. No? Helena's eyebrows rose. You exposed a conspiracy that conveniently pulled every loyal staff member away from their posts, leaving the fortress vulnerable. You forced Rowan to gather everyone in one room, including his entire command structure. And now you're all trapped here while my soldiers control the courtyard, the gates, and every strategic position in this fortress. If you're not a pawn, you're remarkably unlucky. The words hit like a physical blow. Eliza's exposure of the conspiracy had done exactly what Helena said, concentrated all of Rowan's allies in one location while leaving the rest of Ironcrest undefended. But something didn't fit. You're bluffing, Eliza said quietly. Helena's smile faltered. Excuse me? You're bluffing. If you controlled the fortress, you wouldn't need 20 soldiers in this room. You'd have 20 soldiers guarding us while hundreds more secured the rest of the complex. But you only brought 20 because, understanding crystallized, because that's all you have inside the walls. The rest of your forces are outside, waiting for Captain Varric to open the gates. Every eye turned to Varric. The captain's face had gone pale, sweat beading on his forehead. Helena's expression hardened. Clever girl, but it doesn't matter. Varric, open the gates. Now. Varric stood slowly, his hand on his sword hilt. But he didn't move toward the door. I said now. Helena's voice cracked like a whip. Can't. Varric's voice was rough. Gates require 2 keys, mine and Marcus's. And Marcus... He looked at the head guard. Marcus was never part of this, was he? No, Marcus said flatly, his sword still drawn. I wasn't. The revelation rippled through the hall. Varric had been compromised, but Marcus, Rowan's most trusted guard, had remained loyal, which meant Helena's plan required Varric to physically overpower Marcus and take his key by force, in a room full of armed guards loyal to Rowan. It seems, Rowan said quietly, that you've made a tactical error, cousin. Helena's smile turned sharp and dangerous. Perhaps, or perhaps I have one more card to play. She turned toward Lord Thornfield. Tell them, Edmund, tell them what happens if I don't walk out of here freely in the next 5 minutes. Eliza's father stood, looking far too satisfied for a man who'd been exposed and humiliated moments ago. Lady Morven has agents positioned throughout the kingdom. Agents who have instructions to deliver certain letters to certain people if she doesn't send a coded message by midnight tonight. What letters? Eliza demanded. Correspondence between Duke Ashford and known rebel groups in the southern provinces. Documents suggesting he's been funding separatist movements. Evidence of treason that would see him arrested, tried, and executed within a month. Edmund's smile was poison. All very convincing forgeries, of course, but by the time anyone proves they're fake, Rowan will be dead, and Ironcrest will be in Crown custody. At which point Lady Morven, as the nearest legitimate heir, will petition for ownership. The temperature in the hall seemed to drop 10 degrees. You're planning to have me killed by the Crown, Rowan said slowly, using fabricated evidence of treason. It's a beautiful plan, really, Helena agreed. Either you let me walk out of here with control of Ironcrest, or I destroy you through legal channels. Your choice, cousin. Silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Then Eliza laughed. It wasn't a polite laugh or a nervous one. It was genuine amusement, bright and startling in the tense atmosphere. Every head turned toward her. I'm sorry, she said, pressing a hand to her mouth. I'm sorry, it's just... You've made the same mistake everyone else makes. And what mistake is that? Helena's voice had gone cold. You assumed I'm powerless, decorative, a victim. Eliza stepped forward, and she felt the shift in the room as people leaned in, listening. You assumed that because I can't bear children, I'm worthless, that I'm just a tool in someone else's game. But here's what you didn't know. She pulled a folded document from her bodice. She'd kept it there all night, close to her heart. 3 days ago, I sent my own letters to the Crown's chief magistrate, to the royal auditor, and to the commander of the King's Guard. I sent them copies of every piece of evidence we'd gathered, the fraudulent contracts, the stolen funds, and most importantly, she unfolded the document. A sworn affidavit from Mrs. Talbot, witnessed by a licensed notary, detailing the entire conspiracy, including House Morven's involvement. Helena's face went white. The magistrate received it 2 days ago, Eliza continued. By now, Crown investigators are already en route to Morven Holdings to secure evidence. Any letters your agents send claiming Rowan is a traitor will arrive after the Crown already knows the truth. That you're the one who's been funding theft and conspiracy to steal Ashford lands. You're lying. But Helena's voice had lost its certainty. Am I? Ask Captain Varick. Ask him what I offered him 2 days ago when I figured out he was working with you. Eliza looked at the captain. Tell them. Varick's jaw worked. Then, slowly, he reached into his coat and pulled out a second folded document. Immunity, he said hoarsely. Full immunity from prosecution in exchange for testimony against House Morven. Signed by the Duke and Duchess of Ashford, witnessed by Marcus and 2 other guards. He looked at Helena. I'm sorry, my lady, but I have a family. I can't hang for treason. The betrayal hit Helena like a physical blow. She staggered back a step, her carefully maintained composure fracturing. You turned my own conspirator against me, she whispered. I gave him a choice, Eliza corrected. Hang as a traitor or testify as a witness. It's amazing how quickly loyalty evaporates when people realize they're going to die for someone else's ambition. Helena's hand moved toward her sword. Her soldiers tensed, weapons rising, but Rowan was faster. Marcus, signal the towers. Marcus moved to the window and pulled back the heavy curtain. He struck a flint against steel, igniting a prepared torch, and held it high. Immediately, answering lights flared from 3 guard towers around the fortress. Then more. Then dozens. Helena's soldiers looked toward the windows, and Eliza saw realization dawn on their faces. The fortress wasn't undefended. Rowan hadn't pulled every guard to the Great Hall. He'd repositioned them, hidden them. And now, at Marcus's signal, they were revealing themselves. You have 20 soldiers in this room, Rowan said calmly. I have 200 positioned throughout Ironcrest. They've been watching your forces outside the walls for the past hour. If you try to fight your way out, you'll be cut down before you reach the courtyard. And if your agents release those forged letters, Helena's voice was desperate now, grasping for any leverage. Then they'll be arrested for distributing fraudulent documents in an attempt to frame a peer of the realm. Eliza kept her voice steady. I told you, the Crown already knows the truth. Your plan failed the moment you walked through those doors. Helena looked around the hall, at Varick's betrayal, at her trapped soldiers, at the lights burning in every tower. The trap she'd thought she was springing had reversed. She was the one caught. You planned this, she said slowly, looking at Eliza with something almost like respect. All of it, the dinner, the confrontation with Edmund, even the conspiracy exposure. You used it all to draw me out. Not alone. Eliza glanced at Rowan. It was a joint effort. When? Helena demanded. When did you figure it out? The grain prices, Eliza said. They weren't just inflated. They were inflated to specific suppliers who all traced back to Morven Holdings. No one steals that systematically without a larger plan. Once I knew you were involved, the rest fell into place. You needed Ironcrest bankrupt and Rowan vulnerable. The conspiracy was never just about theft. It was about conquest. Helena's laugh was bitter. All that effort, all that planning, undone by a girl who wasn't supposed to matter. That seems to be a theme tonight, Eliza agreed. For a long moment, Helena just stared at her. Then slowly, she unbuckled her sword belt and let it fall to the floor with a clatter. I yield, she said quietly. For now. Your soldiers? Rowan's voice was hard. Helena gestured sharply, and her 20 men lowered their weapons. Marcus's guards moved immediately to disarm them, working with practiced efficiency. Lord Thornfield made a strangled sound of rage. "You promised me. You said if I helped you." "I promised you nothing, Edmund." Helena's gaze was cold. "You were a useful idiot who sold his daughter and thought it made him clever. Now you're just an idiot." Edmund lunged toward her, but Marcus's guards caught him before he'd taken 2 steps. He struggled, screaming incoherent threats, but they held him easily. Eliza watched her father's final collapse with something that wasn't quite satisfaction. It was more like closure. The man who'd sold her, used her, tried to make her a weapon. He was powerless now, broken, finished. She felt nothing. "Take them both to the holding cells," Rowan ordered. "Separate rooms, guards on each door. No visitors, no messages, no contact with anyone except me or the Duchess." As the guards began escorting prisoners out, Eliza felt the tension in the hall finally begin to ease. Household staff members looked at each other with expressions ranging from shock to relief to shame. Some had known about the conspiracy, others had been used, but all of them had just witnessed its complete unraveling. Mrs. Talbot was led past, still bound, her face a mask of defeat. She paused near Eliza. "I underestimated you," the housekeeper said quietly. "We all did." "Yes," Eliza agreed. "You did. Why offer Varric immunity but not me?" "Because Varric was a soldier following orders from someone he believed had authority. You were the architect. There's a difference." Eliza's voice was without mercy. "You helped my father use me as a weapon. That's not something I can forgive." Mrs. Talbot nodded slowly, as if she'd expected that answer. The guards led her away. The hall was clearing now, prisoners being removed, soldiers standing down, household staff dismissed to their quarters. Within minutes, only a core group remained: Rowan, Marcus, Eliza, Clara, and a handful of senior guards. Rowan turned to Eliza. For a moment he just looked at her, his expression unreadable. Then he did something she'd never expected. He bowed. Not a formal court bow, but a deep, genuine gesture of respect. From a duke to his duchess. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You saved us all tonight." Eliza's throat tightened. "We saved each other. That was the plan. The plan was to expose the conspiracy and turn it against itself. You did that. But the move with the crown letters, the immunity offer to Varric, that was brilliant strategy I didn't anticipate." He straightened. "You think like a general. Where did you learn that?" "Books, mostly. My father's library had military histories. I read them when I couldn't sleep." She smiled slightly. "Turns out the tactics that work in war work equally well in households full of traitors." Marcus coughed. It might have been covering a laugh. "Your Grace, the Crown investigators will arrive within 2 days, according to the courier's schedule. What should we tell them?" "The truth," Rowan said immediately. "Everything. The conspiracy, the evidence, our countermeasures. Let them verify it all independently. I want this handled by the book, so no one can claim we fabricated anything." "And House Morven?" "Will face treason charges. Helena will likely lose her titles and lands. Her family will be ruined." Rowan's expression was grim. "I take no pleasure in that. But she made her choice." "What about my father?" Eliza's voice was steady, but she felt Clara's supportive hand on her shoulder. "Conspiracy, fraud, and attempted murder. He grabbed your throat in front of witnesses. He'll be tried, convicted, and probably executed within 3 months." Rowan watched her carefully. "I can push for exile instead if you want. As a mercy." Eliza thought about the man who'd sold her, who'd used her as a pawn, and then tried to destroy her when she broke free. The man who'd looked her in the eye and called her worthless. "No mercy," she said quietly. "He made his choices. He can live with the consequences. Or die with them." Rowan nodded. So be it. The finality of it settled over Eliza like snow. Her father would die. House Thornfield would collapse. The creditors would seize everything. The estate would be sold. The name would become synonymous with betrayal and failure. She waited to feel something: grief, regret, guilt. But there was only relief. And beneath it, something that might eventually become peace. "Your Grace?" Claire's voice was soft. The household will need direction tomorrow. With Mrs. Talbot gone, someone needs to manage the staff. Find someone trustworthy, Eliza said. Someone who wasn't part of the conspiracy. Promote from within if you can. People who've proven their loyalty tonight deserve recognition. And the account books? I'll finish the audit myself, with help from anyone who knows numbers and can be trusted. Eliza looked at Marcus. Can you recommend people? Several. I'll have names for you by morning. The conversation continued. Practical matters, logistics, the 1,000 details of rebuilding a functional household from the wreckage of conspiracy. But underneath it all, Eliza felt a shift. The staff who remained were looking at her differently now, not with contempt or dismissal, but with something approaching respect. She'd proven herself, not through birth or bloodline, but through intelligence and courage. By being underestimated and turning that perception into a weapon, the broken girl her father had sold no longer existed. In her place stood the Duchess of Ashford. Later, much later, Eliza stood on the battlements and watched the stars wheel overhead. The fortress was quiet now. Guards at their posts, prisoners secured, the household settling into an exhausted peace. Footsteps announced Rowan's arrival before his voice did. Couldn't sleep? Too much adrenaline. My mind won't stop working through scenarios. Eliza glanced at him. You should rest. The Crown investigators will want detailed testimony. So should you. He moved to stand beside her, looking out over the dark mountains. But I understand. Tonight was... He paused, searching for words. I've been in battles where I felt less at risk than I did in that hall. Helena almost won. But she didn't, because you were 3 steps ahead of her. Eliza shook her head. We were 3 steps ahead. You positioned the guards. You kept Varick's betrayal secret while I worked on him. You trusted me to execute the plan without micromanaging every detail. I had no choice but to trust you. You were the only person in this fortress with no reason to want me dead or controlled. Rowan's voice was quiet. I bought you thinking you'd be a strategic asset, a safe wife who couldn't be used as leverage. I didn't expect... He stopped. What? A partner. An ally who could match me move for move. He turned to look at her directly. I didn't expect to respect you, Eliza, but I do. Completely. The words hung in the cold mountain air between them. Eliza's breath misted as she exhaled slowly. I came here expecting a prison, a marriage of convenience to a man who'd use me as callously as my father did. Instead, she gestured at the fortress. Instead, I found purpose, challenges, problems I could actually solve instead of just enduring. She met his eyes. I didn't expect to find an ally either. Rowan smiled, a rare, genuine expression that transformed his harsh features into something almost warm. Then I suppose we're both surprised. Pleasantly? Remarkably so. They stood in companionable silence, watching the night. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. The mountains loomed dark and massive against the stars. What happens next? Eliza asked finally. After the Crown investigators finish? After the trials? We rebuild. Properly this time, with staff we can trust and systems that can't be easily corrupted. We restore the estate's finances, strengthen the defenses, secure the borders. Rowan paused. And we figure out what kind of household we want Ironcrest to be. Not what tradition demands, not what my family's bloody history dictates. What we choose. That's a radical idea. So is a duchess who dismantles conspiracies in her first month of marriage. We're already breaking tradition. Might as well embrace it. Eliza laughed, soft and genuine. My father would be horrified. Good. He deserves worse than horror. They fell silent again, but it was comfortable now. 2 people who'd been strangers 3 weeks ago, brought together by necessity, discovering they could build something functional, maybe even something good. Eliza? Rowan's voice was careful. The marriage, our arrangement, it was meant to be purely strategic, no expectations, no demands. But if you wanted... He stopped, clearly struggling with words. If you wanted to renegotiate the terms, I'd listen. Eliza's heart jumped. What kind of renegotiation? Friendship? Maybe. Real partnership, not just strategic alliance. I won't pretend this could ever be a conventional marriage. We agreed it wouldn't be. But it could be more than a business arrangement if you wanted. And if I said yes, what would that look like? I don't know. We'd figure it out as we went, like everything else we've done. He smiled slightly. We seem to work well when improvising. Eliza considered this. A month ago, she'd been a discarded daughter with no future. Now she was a duchess with power, respect, and a husband who was offering genuine partnership. Not love, neither of them was naive enough to promise that. Not romance or passion or any of the things songs and stories claimed marriage should be, but something real, something solid, built on mutual respect and shared purpose. I'd like that, she said quietly. Yes. Rowan's expression eased into something that might have been relief. Good. Then we'll start there and see where it leads. He offered his hand, not in command or demand, but in alliance. Eliza took it, their fingers interlacing with surprising ease. Two people who'd been weapons in other people's wars, choosing instead to be partners in their own. The fortress stood solid around them. The mountains kept their ancient watch. And somewhere in the holding cells below, the conspirators who'd tried to destroy them sat in darkness, their schemes unraveled by the woman they'd dismissed as worthless. Eliza stood on the battlements of Ironcrest Abbey, her hand clasped in her husband's, and felt something she'd never expected to feel again. Hope. The broken girl was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who'd taken every limitation, every dismissal, every attempt to control her, and forged them into armor and weapons. Someone who'd won. Come on, Rowan said, tugging gently at her hand. We should rest. Tomorrow starts the real work. The real work? Rebuilding. It's always harder than destroying, slower, more complicated, but more worthwhile. Eliza nodded and let him lead her back toward the warm interior of the fortress. Behind them, the stars wheeled overhead, indifferent and eternal. But in the great hall below, household staff were already whispering about the duchess who'd torn apart a conspiracy, the southern bride who'd proven more dangerous than any northern warrior, the woman who'd been sold as worthless and had rewritten the rules of power itself. The stories were just beginning, and this time Eliza would be the one writing them. The Crown investigators arrived like a storm, 12 officials in royal blue, led by Magistrate Cornelius Thorne, a man whose reputation for ruthless honesty preceded him by several kingdoms. He was 70 if he was a day, with iron-gray hair, shrewd eyes, and a voice that could strip paint from walls. Eliza met him in the courtyard at dawn, flanked by Rowan and Marcus. She'd barely slept, spending the night organizing evidence into meticulously labeled folders. If the Crown was going to investigate, she'd make damn sure they had everything they needed. Your Grace. Magistrate Thorne bowed precisely to Rowan, then turned to Eliza with the same gesture. And Your Grace, I understand you're the one who initiated this investigation. I am. Eliza kept her voice steady. We've prepared comprehensive documentation of the conspiracy, including financial records, witness testimony, and physical evidence. Everything is ready for your review. Thorne's eyebrows rose fractionally. Efficient. Most people we investigate spend weeks trying to hide evidence or fabricate explanations. You've done our job for us. I want the truth documented, Eliza said simply. All of it, so there can be no question about what happened here. Over the next 3 days, the investigators tore through Ironcrest like a surgical team. They examined every ledger, interviewed every servant, compared documents against originals held in Crown archives. Eliza answered hundreds of questions with precise detail, walking them through her discovery process, her strategies, the trap she'd set. Magistrate Thorne listened to it all with an expression that revealed nothing. On the 4th day, he summoned Rowan and Eliza to a private meeting in the study that had become Eliza's de facto office. The magistrate settled into a chair with the careful movements of someone whose joints ached, then fixed them both with a penetrating stare. I've been investigating corruption for 40 years, he said without preamble. I've seen schemes that would make your head spin. But this, he gestured at the stacks of evidence. This is among the most comprehensive conspiracies I've encountered. The coordination, the timeline, the sheer audacity of it. He paused. And you dismantled it in 3 weeks. We had help, Eliza said, glancing at Rowan. Don't be modest, Your Grace. The Duke may have provided resources, but the strategy was yours. The immunity offer to Captain Varick, the letters to the Crown, the trap that caught Lady Morven. Thorne leaned forward. You're 23 years old and you outmaneuvered people twice your age with decades of experience in manipulation and deceit. That's not luck. That's exceptional intelligence. Eliza felt heat rise in her cheeks. I just did what needed to be done. Thorne pulled out a sealed document. The Crown's official verdict. House Morven is stripped of all titles and lands, pending trial for treason. Lady Helena Morven will stand before the King's bench within the month. Lord Edmund Thornfield faces execution for conspiracy, fraud, and attempted murder. His trial is scheduled for next week. Mrs. Talbot and 17 other co-conspirators will face lesser charges but significant sentences. Eliza's hands tightened in her lap. Her father would die. The knowledge sat heavy in her chest, but she couldn't bring herself to feel grief, only a strange, cold finality. Additionally, Thorne continued, the Crown recognizes the exceptional service you've rendered, not just in exposing this conspiracy, but in preventing what could have been a significant destabilization of the Northern Territories. House Morven's schemes went far deeper than we initially understood. Their goal was to create a power vacuum that would have invited foreign intervention. You stopped a potential war. Rowan's expression sharpened. We weren't aware the implications were that severe. Neither was House Morven, I suspect. They were focused on conquest, not the broader consequences. But the result is the same. Your actions preserved the kingdom's stability. Thorne pulled out another document, this one bearing the royal seal. His Majesty wishes to express his gratitude. You're both invited to court. And Duchess Eliza, he looked at her directly. The king requests a private audience. He's heard about your methods and would like to discuss them personally. Eliza's mind went blank. The king wants to meet with me? Specifically. Not as the Duke's wife, but as yourself. He's interested in your strategic mind. Thorne's expression softened fractionally. Between you and me, Your Grace, His Majesty has been looking for intelligent advisors who can think unconventionally. You've demonstrated both qualities in abundance. I'm honored, Eliza managed, but I'm needed here. The estate still requires months of work, I'm aware. The Crown isn't requesting you abandon Ironcrest. Just visit, consider it. Thorne stood, signaling the meeting's end. My team will finish our investigation within 2 days. Then we'll return to the capital with prisoners in custody. Think about the king's invitation. It's not one he extends lightly. After the magistrate left, Eliza sat in stunned silence. You're not considering refusing, are you? Rowan asked. I don't know. Court politics they're different from household management, more dangerous. Different, yes. More dangerous? Rowan smiled slightly. You just dismantled a conspiracy that involved treason and attempted assassination. I think you can handle courtiers. This is different. I'd be representing Ironcrest, representing you. What if I make a mistake? Rowan reached across the desk and took her hand, a gesture that had become more natural over the past few days. Then you'll handle it the same way you've handled everything else, with intelligence, courage, and absolutely no mercy for people who underestimate you. Eliza laughed despite herself. When you put it that way, think about it. The king doesn't summon people to threaten them. He summons people he wants to recruit. This could be an opportunity. For what? To change more than just Ironcrest, to influence policy at the highest levels, to prove that women can be more than decorative wives and heir producers. His grip tightened. To rewrite the rules for everyone, not just ourselves. The possibility bloomed in Eliza's mind like a dangerous flower. Power not just within one household, but across the entire kingdom. The chance to demonstrate that intelligence mattered more than bloodline, that worth came from action rather than biology. I'll think about it, she said quietly. Lord Edmund Thornfield's execution was scheduled for a gray morning 2 weeks later. Eliza received the notice and stared at it for a long time, feeling nothing. She didn't attend. Rowan offered to go in her place, to witness on her behalf, but she declined. He's already dead to me, she said. Watching him physically die changes nothing. Instead, she spent that morning in the newly reorganized account office, working with Clara and 3 trusted assistants to rebuild Ironcrest's financial systems from the ground up. New procedures, new checks and balances, new protocols that made theft significantly harder and corruption immediately visible. At precisely 9 bells, the scheduled time of execution, Clara paused in her work and looked at Eliza. "Your Grace? Are you—" "Fine." Eliza kept writing, her hand steady. "Continue with the supplier contracts. I want everything reviewed by end of week." Clara nodded and returned to her own work. The others followed suit. No one mentioned what was happening in the capital. But when the bell tower chimed 10 times, marking the hour's end, Eliza set down her pen and walked to the window. She looked out over the mountains, the forests, the fortress that had become her home. Somewhere, hundreds of miles away, her father was dead. The man who'd sold her, used her, called her worthless and broken. She waited for grief, for relief, for anything. What she felt was closure, clean and final as a door slamming shut. "Goodbye, Father," she whispered to the wind. "I hope it was worth it." Then she turned back to her desk and picked up her pen. There was work to do. 3 months later, Ironcrest had transformed. The physical changes were obvious: repairs to long-neglected structures, new guard rotations, a completely reorganized household staff. But the deeper changes were more profound. Eliza had implemented systems that gave even the lowest servants channels to report problems without fear of retribution. She'd established fair wages and clear promotion criteria based on merit rather than favoritism. The estate's finances had stabilized. With the corruption purged, income from the northern territories was flowing properly again. Rowan had negotiated new trade agreements with neighboring houses, using his restored reputation to leverage better terms. But the most radical change was still taking shape in Eliza's mind. She stood in what had once been the fortress's abandoned east wing, 20 rooms that hadn't been used in decades, slowly succumbing to decay and neglect. Rowan stood beside her, looking around with an expression somewhere between curiosity and concern. "You're serious about this?" he asked. "Completely." Eliza gestured at the empty space. "We have the resources now. We have the space, and we have the opportunity to do something that matters. It's unprecedented. People will talk. People are already talking. Let them talk about something worthwhile." What Eliza proposed was simple in concept, revolutionary in execution: a home for abandoned children. Not an orphanage in the traditional sense. Those were grim, underfunded institutions that warehoused children until they were old enough to be turned out. This would be different. A place where children could live, learn, grow, where they'd be taught reading, mathematics, practical skills. Where worth was measured by potential and character, not by who their parents were or what bloodlines they carried. A place for children like her, the ones declared worthless by a world obsessed with inheritance and legitimacy. "We can't have biological heirs," Eliza said quietly. "But that doesn't mean we can't have a family, just a different kind." Rowan was silent for a long moment, studying her face. Then he nodded slowly. "All right, let's build it." The work began immediately. Contractors were hired. Rooms were gutted and rebuilt. Teachers were recruited, educated men and women willing to work with children from backgrounds most nobles wouldn't acknowledge. Clara threw herself into the organization with fierce enthusiasm, coordinating everything from curriculum to meal planning. News spread quickly. The Duke and Duchess of Ashford were creating a home for unwanted children. Reactions ranged from approval to bewilderment to outright mockery. "They can't have real heirs, so they're collecting broken ones instead," one courtier was reported to have said. When Eliza heard the comment, she laughed. "Broken children, broken Duchess. I suppose we'll all be broken together. That should be interesting." The first child arrived on a cold autumn morning. A girl of 7, thin and fierce-eyed, dragged from the streets of a nearby town by a magistrate who'd heard about the Ashford initiative. Her name was Anna, and she kicked and swore like a sailor when they tried to give her a bath. Eliza sat with her in the newly finished common room, keeping a careful distance while Clara attempted to negotiate the bath situation. "I don't need charity," Anna spat. "I can take care of myself." "I'm sure you can," Eliza said calmly. "But this isn't charity. This is an opportunity. You can leave anytime you want. No one will force you to stay." But while you're here, you'll have a bed, food, and the chance to learn skills that will let you choose your own future." "Why?" Anna's eyes were suspicious. "Why do you care?" "Because someone should have cared about me when I needed it, and didn't." Eliza met the girl's gaze steadily. "Because the world told me I was worthless, and I had to prove them wrong alone. I want you to have better than that. If you'll let us help." Anna stared at her for a long moment. Then grudgingly, she allowed Clara to lead her toward the bathroom. More children followed. Boys and girls from ages 5 to 15, each with their own stories of abandonment, abuse, or simple bad luck. Some adapted quickly, others fought every step of the way. All of them were treated with respect, given structure and opportunity, and allowed to prove their own worth. Within 6 months, the East Wing housed 23 children. Within a year, 37. The complaints from traditionalist nobles grew louder, but so did the voices of support. Magistrates began sending children to Ironcrest instead of workhouses. Common folk spoke of the Duchess, who took in strays and taught them to read. Stories spread about children from nothing who'd learned trades, mathematics, even healing arts at Ashford's unconventional school. And through it all, Eliza and Rowan built something that looked nothing like a traditional noble household, but worked better than most. The summons to court came again, more formally this time. A royal command, not a request. The king wished to meet with the Duke and Duchess of Ashford regarding their innovative approaches to estate management and social welfare. They traveled to the capital in early spring, arriving at the palace with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. The court was everything Eliza had heard, glittering, dangerous, full of people who smiled while calculating how to destroy you. But she dealt with worse in her own household. The king received them in a private audience chamber, with only 2 advisors present. He was younger than Eliza expected, perhaps 40, with sharp eyes and an air of barely contained energy. "Duke Ashford, Duchess Eliza." He gestured to chairs. "Please sit. I've been eager to meet you both, but particularly you, Your Grace." He looked at Eliza. "Magistrate Thorne spoke very highly of your methods." "I'm honored, Your Majesty." "Don't be. I don't give compliments lightly. I'm interested in results." The king leaned forward. "You dismantled a conspiracy in 3 weeks that my investigators missed for 3 years. You've reorganized an estate's finances so thoroughly that they're now being used as a model for other struggling houses. And now you're running what amounts to an experimental school for children the nobility considers disposable. Tell me, what drives you?" The directness caught Eliza off guard. She exchanged a glance with Rowan, who nodded fractionally. "Tell him the truth." "I was considered disposable myself, Your Majesty. Infertile, worthless in a world that measures women's value by their ability to produce heirs. My father sold me to settle debts. I was supposed to disappear into obscurity." She met the king's eyes. "Instead, I found ways to be useful, to prove that worth comes from action, not biology. The children in our home deserve the same chance. And if they fail, then they fail having tried, rather than never having the opportunity at all. That's worth something." The king studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled, genuine warmth that transformed his features. "I like you, Duchess Eliza. You're direct, practical, and you don't waste time with false modesty." He turned to one of his advisors. "What do you think, Chancellor? Could we use someone like her?" The Chancellor, an older man with calculating eyes, nodded slowly. "The Crown could benefit from diverse perspectives on social policy, Your Majesty, particularly regarding resource management and welfare systems." "My thought exactly." The king looked back at Eliza. "I'd like to offer you a position. Royal Advisor on Estate Reform and Social Welfare. It would require you to spend part of each year at court, consulting on policy, reviewing proposals from other noble houses. You'd have significant influence over how the kingdom addresses poverty, education, and resource distribution." Eliza's breath caught. "Your Majesty, I'm not qualified. You reorganized a failing estate in months. You created a functional education system from nothing. You outmaneuvered experienced conspirators using nothing but intelligence and strategy. You're more qualified than half my current advisors." His expression grew serious. "I'm trying to modernize this kingdom, Duchess. To move past traditions that no longer serve us. I need people who can think differently, who can prove that new approaches work. You've already done that. I'm asking you to do it on a larger scale. Eliza looked at Rowan. His expression was carefully neutral, but she saw the slight nod. Your choice. I would need to maintain my responsibilities at Ironcrest, she said carefully. The children there depend on stability. I can't abandon them. Understood. We'll work around your schedule. Perhaps 4 months at court, 8 months at Ironcrest. We can negotiate details. And my voice would be heard? My recommendations actually considered? Your recommendations would carry the weight of royal backing. When you speak, people will listen or answer to me. The king's smile was sharp. I don't collect advisors as decorations, Duchess. I collect them to use their talents. Say yes. It was everything Eliza had never imagined. Power, influence, the chance to change systems that had declared her worthless, to rewrite rules for an entire kingdom. Yes, she said quietly. I accept. The news spread through the kingdom like wildfire. A duchess appointed as royal advisor. A woman given policy influence at the highest levels. An infertile bride who'd been sold for debts was now shaping the future of the realm. The backlash was immediate and vicious. She's overstepping her place, traditionalist nobles complained. Women aren't meant for policy work. She has no children of her own. What does she know about families? This is what happens when someone without proper bloodline is given power. But the support was equally strong. Common folk spoke of the Duchess, who'd risen from nothing to something. Women across the kingdom saw a crack in the wall of limitations that had confined them. Children in the Ironcrest home became symbols of possibility, broken things made whole through opportunity and care. Eliza weathered the criticism with the same cold precision she'd used against Mrs. Talbot and Lady Morven. She did her work, produced results, let her success speak louder than any defense. Within a year, 3 other noble houses had established similar programs for abandoned children, using Ironcrest as a model. Within 2 years, the Crown had implemented new policies on estate management that incorporated Eliza's efficiency systems. Within 3 years, people had stopped asking whether a woman could do the work and started asking for her advice on how to do it better. 5 years after being sold like property, Eliza stood in the Great Hall of Ironcrest Abbey and watched as 47 children, their children now, in every way that mattered, celebrated the winter festival. They decorated the hall with pine branches and candles. The long table was laden with food prepared by the fortress's kitchen staff, who'd learned to account for 47 additional mouths and somehow made it work. Music filled the space. Several of the older children had learned instruments and were playing with enthusiastic imprecision. Anna, now 12 and fierce as ever, was organizing the younger children into some kind of performance. Marcus's daughter had joined the household last year and was teaching several kids basic sword forms. Clara's nephew was demonstrating a card trick he'd learned from one of the traveling teachers. Chaos. Beautiful, messy, loud chaos. Rowan appeared beside Eliza, 2 cups of mulled wine in his hands. He offered her one, and they stood together watching the celebration. Do you remember what you said the night we met? He asked. I said several things, most of them defensive. You said you were getting what you bargained for, a terrifying husband, an impossible situation. Eliza smiled. I was wrong. This is nothing like what I bargained for. Better? Immeasurably. They'd never developed romantic love. That wasn't what their marriage was built on. But they'd found something rarer and more valuable, genuine partnership, mutual respect, the kind of deep friendship that came from facing nightmares together and coming out stronger on the other side. The king sent another letter, Rowan said. He wants your input on the northern trade negotiations. Of course he does. Eliza sipped her wine. I'll review the proposals tonight. You're already working too hard. The court sessions, the estate management, the school. I'm doing exactly what I want to be doing. She looked at him. For the first time in my life, I get to choose. That's worth any amount of hard work. Anna's performance began, a dramatic retelling of some story she'd invented, complete with exaggerated gestures and terrible rhyming. The other children watched with rapt attention or barely concealed amusement. Do you ever regret it? Rowan asked quietly. The marriage? The circumstances that brought you here? Eliza considered the question seriously. Did she regret being sold by her father? Being declared worthless? being forced into a situation she'd never chosen. "I regret the cruelty," she said finally, "the unnecessary pain. But the outcome?" She gestured at the hall, the children, the life they'd built. "No, I don't regret this. Even though we'll never have biological children? Especially because of that. If I could have had children the traditional way, I might never have looked beyond tradition. I might never have realized there are other ways to build a family, other ways to measure worth." She looked at him. "We're raising 47 children who will grow up knowing their value isn't determined by who their parents were or what bloodlines they carry. They'll know it comes from choices, actions, character. That's a legacy worth more than any bloodline." Rowan's expression softened. "You know, when I bought you, I thought I was getting protection, a safe wife who couldn't be used as a weapon. I was wrong. I can absolutely be used as a weapon. Just ask Lady Morven." He laughed. "Fair point, but what I meant was, I thought I was making a strategic move, a calculated risk to protect myself. Instead, I found someone who changed everything, not just for me, but for this entire region, possibly the entire kingdom, if the king gets his way." "We changed everything," Eliza corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without your support. And I couldn't have imagined doing any of this without your vision." Anna's performance ended with a dramatic flourish that sent the younger children into applause and giggles. She bowed with exaggerated formality, then caught sight of Eliza and Rowan watching. Her fierce little face softened into something approaching a smile. "Did you see?" she called across the hall. "I wrote it myself." "It was magnificent," Eliza called back, meaning it. Anna beamed and dove back into organizing the next activity. "She's going to be terrifying when she grows up," Rowan observed. "Yes, and the world will be better for it." They stood together in the warm, chaotic hall, watching children who'd been considered worthless discover their own strength, building a future that had nothing to do with bloodlines and everything to do with choice. Outside, snow began to fall over the mountains. The fortress stood solid and strong, no longer a place of fear and assassination, but a home, a sanctuary, a place where broken things became whole. And in the center of it all stood Eliza Ashford, once a daughter sold in a storm, now a duchess who'd rewritten the rules of power itself. The girl declared worthless had become worth everything, not because someone gave her value, but because she'd seized it with both hands and refused to let go. 10 years later. The records would show that Duchess Eliza Ashford served as royal advisor for 15 years, implementing reforms that transformed how the kingdom addressed poverty, education, and social welfare. That she and Duke Rowan Ashford raised over 200 children through their unconventional home, many of whom went on to become teachers, merchants, craftspeople, and even scholars. That 3 of those children were eventually knighted for service to the crown. That 7 became educators who established similar schools across the kingdom. That countless others simply lived full, chosen lives that would have been impossible without the chance they'd been given. The records would show that the Ashford estate became one of the most financially stable and efficiently run in the Northern Territories, a model studied by estate managers for generations. But what the records couldn't capture was simpler and more profound. A woman who'd been told she was broken had built something beautiful from the pieces. A marriage of convenience had become a partnership that changed a kingdom, and a fortress that had been synonymous with fear had become a symbol of hope. Eliza stood in her study one spring morning, reading a letter from a young woman who'd lived at Ironcrest years ago. She was a teacher now, running her own school in a southern city, writing to thank the Duchess who'd given her the education that made it possible. "You taught me that worth is something we create, not something we're given. That legacy is what we choose to build, not what we inherit. Thank you for showing me, for showing all of us, that broken things can be stronger than whole ones, if we refuse to stay shattered." Eliza folded the letter carefully and added it to the collection she kept in a locked drawer, hundreds of them now, from children grown into adults, each one a small testament to choices made and lives changed. She heard footsteps in the corridor. Rowan, likely, coming to remind her about the council meeting that afternoon. Or Anna, now 22 and serving as Ironcrest's education coordinator, with yet another proposal for expanding the curriculum. Life continued. Work continued. The legacy they'd built together kept growing, branching, spreading. And Eliza smiled, picking up her pen to begin the day's correspondence. Once upon a time, she'd been a daughter sold in a storm, declared worthless, erased from her father's ledger, cast aside like something broken beyond repair. But in the ruins of that old life, she'd found something her father had never understood. The truly powerful aren't those born to it. They're the ones who take every limitation, every dismissal, every attempt to break them, and forge it into armor. The woman once discarded as worthless had become the force that reshaped everything, and she was just getting started.